Most people walking into their 60s make two moves. They start looking for a single-story home, no stairs. Easier on the joints, safer if you slip. And they pull their savings back, tightening the grip on whatever they have saved. $400,000, $500,000, because they don't want inflation touching it. Both of those moves feel responsible. Both of them look like planning ahead. But here's what nobody says out loud. Those two decisions, removing the stairs and hoarding the cash, quietly strip away the two most important things keeping you healthy and financially alive. Stairs are free exercise. Climbing them every day keeps your legs working, your balance sharp, your muscle mass from disappearing. The moment you remove that friction from your life, your body starts adjusting to a world where it doesn't need to do much, and it adjusts fast. It's the same thing with money. Locking your savings in cash or low-yield accounts because the market feels scary doesn't protect you. It just trades one risk for another, the slow, certain erosion of what you have left. You think you're choosing safety. But there's no such thing as a neutral choice here. Pick total comfort today, and you're projecting a future where your legs are weaker, your money buys less, and your options have quietly narrowed without you noticing when it happened. So if the most conventional advice is getting it wrong, what are people who are actually retired, actually living well on a few $100,000 actually saying? Let's talk about the $2,000 secret of the retirement kings. Here's a number that keeps showing up in retirement forums, in comment sections, in conversations between people who actually pulled it off. $2,000 a month. Not $6,000. Not $10,000. $2,000 a month. And people are living well on it. Not surviving. Living. The math behind it isn't complicated. If you've saved $500,000 and you put it into something generating a conservative 5% annually, that's $25,000 a year. Just over $2,000 a month. That's your floor before Social Security even enters the picture. Now here's where the conversation splits into two very different lives. In Los Angeles, $2,000 a month doesn't cover rent. In New York, it's gone before the second week. In Miami, property taxes alone have jumped so sharply in the last few years that people who move there expecting a cheap retirement are sitting with bills they didn't plan for. I've watched people describe that moment, opening a property tax notice in Florida and realizing the beach town they moved to is no longer the affordable retirement they came for. That particular shock has its own specific feeling. It's not panic. It's more like, I did everything right, and somehow it's still not enough. That's what $2,000 a month looks like in a high cost of living state. Tight, anxious, counting. But move the geography, and the same $2,000 becomes something else entirely. Certain states have no income tax, no tax on Social Security, lower property values, lower insurance rates, lower cost of groceries, lower cost of everything that quietly drains an account. Tennessee, Texas, South Dakota. The gap between living there versus living in California isn't marginal. It can be $800 to $1,200 a month in pure savings without changing your lifestyle at all. And then there's the international option, which more people are seriously considering than the financial media tends to acknowledge. Parts of Mexico, the Caribbean, Portugal, places where $2,000 a month isn't a floor. It's a budget that covers a furnished apartment, fresh food every day, health care that isn't absurdly priced, and enough left over to actually do things. This is geo-arbitrage. The idea is simple. The number in your account doesn't change, but where you spend it determines whether you feel poor or whether you feel like a king. The worst retirement advice making the rounds right now is to stay put, to maintain your current life in your current expensive city, because it's familiar, because your friends are there, because moving feels like too much at 62. That advice is expensive. Comfortable, maybe, but expensive. Here's the real trade-off you're making. Staying in a high cost of living area to preserve familiarity costs you years of financial breathing room. It's not a neutral choice. You're paying every month for the comfort of not having to adjust. The people who figured out the $2,000 secret aren't smarter. They're not wealthier. They made a different calculation, one that asked not, how do I protect what I have? But where does what I have go the furthest? That's a different question, and it leads somewhere different. But here's the thing, and this is where most of the advice stops too early. Plenty of people solve the money equation. They find the right location, lower their costs, feel that initial relief. And then a few months in, they wake up on a Tuesday morning with nowhere to be, nothing that needs them, and they realize the location problem was only half the problem. Money is one equation. But there's another one underneath it that most retirement planning completely ignores. I remember that feeling. The first few months after the work stopped. No calls coming in, no problems to solve, no one needing you to show up anywhere. And the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was disorienting. That's the part nobody puts in the retirement brochure. For 40 years, your job wasn't just where you went Monday morning. It was how you answered the question, who are you? It structured your time, gave you a title, a team, a reason to be somewhere at a specific hour. When that ends, even if you chose it, even if you planned for it, there's a gap that money can't fill. I've watched this happen to people who did everything right financially, paid off the house, maxed the 401k, retired on schedule, and then spent the first year restless, quietly ashamed to admit they weren't enjoying it the way they thought they would. Think about a man who spent 45 years at the same company. Good career, respected. The kind of person colleagues called when something needed fixing. Then came the retirement party, the plaque, the handshakes. He drove home, walked into a quiet house, and sat there wondering what exactly all of it had been for. That's not a story about ingratitude. That's a story about identity. When your work is your identity, retirement doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like losing the plot. The standard advice is to volunteer, pick up a hobby, stay busy, and for some people, that works fine. But for someone who spent decades as an engineer, a manager, a specialist, being handed a paintbrush or a garden hose doesn't fill the same space. It's not a replacement. It's a distraction from the real question, which is, who are you when the title is gone? What's actually happening underneath is something the keep busy crowd doesn't talk about. The routine is gone. The sense of being needed is gone. And without those anchors, the brain starts reaching for something else to hold on to. If you're nodding at any of this, if the thought of waking up with nowhere to be makes you more anxious than relieved, leave a comment below. You're not the only one who feels this way. The problem is what comes next. Because that anxiety doesn't just sit there. It moves. And it moves toward the two things that feel most controllable, your body and your money. You start reading more about fall prevention. You start pulling cash out of investments. You start building walls around yourself that feel like protection, but are actually just a quieter kind of fear. That shift makes complete psychological sense. When your identity goes quiet, your nervous system reaches for something it can manage. But here's the cost. The empty space where your work used to live doesn't get filled by being more careful. It gets filled by building something new, deliberately, before you need it, not after you're already sitting in the silence. The people who retire well don't wait for the last day of work to figure out who they are without the job. They start constructing that second identity years earlier, while the first one is still running. The ones who don't end up filling the quiet with fear. And fear, over 10 or 15 years, turns out to be one of the most expensive things you can hold on to. I used to think the biggest risk in retirement was a bad year in the market. A crash at the wrong time, right when you need to start drawing down. That was the threat I watched people worry about most, and honestly, it made sense on the surface. I was wrong about that. The real threat is quieter. It doesn't show up in your portfolio statement. It shows up in your legs and in the purchasing power of the cash you've been holding on to because the market made you nervous. Here's what the conventional wisdom gets backwards. The most common advice for your 60s is to simplify your physical environment. Move to a single-story home, eliminate fall hazards, make everything easier to navigate. And to protect your money by keeping a large cushion in cash or low-risk accounts away from market volatility. Both of those feel like prudent, responsible moves. But both of them quietly accelerate the very decline they're trying to prevent. Stairs are not a hazard. They're a workout. Climbing a flight of stairs every day keeps your leg muscles active, maintains your balance, and slows the loss of bone density. The moment you engineer that friction out of your life, your body starts adapting to a world that asks very little of it. And the human body is extremely good at adapting downward. Remove the demand, and capability follows. The financial version of this is almost identical. Keeping a large portion of your savings in cash because you're afraid of volatility feels safe. But cash has its own silent enemy, inflation. If inflation runs at 3% a year, which is roughly the historical average, your purchasing power gets cut in half in about 24 years. Fidelity estimates that a 65-year-old couple today should expect to spend around $315,000 on healthcare costs alone over the rest of their lives. That number will be higher in 10 years. If your cash isn't growing, you're not standing still. You're falling behind on a schedule you can't see. Avoiding stock market risk doesn't eliminate risk. It just trades a visible risk for a guaranteed one. The mechanism here is worth sitting with for a second. When we choose comfort over resistance, physical or financial, we feel like we're making a conservative choice. But conservative relative to what? Conservative relative to a bad day in the market, maybe. Not conservative relative to where you'll be in 15 years if your legs can't carry you up a flight of stairs and your savings have lost a third of their real value. The trade-off isn't between risk and safety. It's between two different kinds of risk. One is uncomfortable and visible. The other is comfortable and invisible. And the invisible one tends to win by default, because it never sets off any alarms until it's already done the damage. So if hoarding cash and avoiding stairs are both forms of the same mistake, what does the right posture actually look like? It means keeping your money invested in something that outpaces inflation over time, even if that means accepting short-term swings. And it means keeping your body under enough regular stress to stay capable, not extreme stress. Just enough that your muscles and your balance remember they're still needed. The goal isn't to eliminate risk from your retirement. The goal is to choose the risks that build you up instead of the ones that quietly hollow you out. There's a pattern that shows up over and over in retirement research, and almost nobody talks about it honestly. People spend their entire working lives being careful with money, saving, deferring, protecting, and then they carry that same psychology straight into retirement. They keep being careful. They keep deferring. And then, somewhere in their late 70s or early 80s, They look at a bank account that still has real money in it and realize they don't have the body anymore to spend it on the things they actually wanted. That's not a financial failure. That's a planning failure disguised as responsibility. The standard framework most people retire on is the 4% rule. Withdraw 4% of your portfolio per year. And statistically, your money should last 30 years. It's a reasonable starting point, but it was designed to solve one problem, making sure you don't run out of money before you die. It wasn't designed to solve the other problem, which is making sure you actually use the money while you're capable of enjoying it. Those are two different problems, and most retirement plans only address one of them. What the data actually shows is that spending in retirement follows a natural curve. In the early years, roughly 60 to 70, people are mobile, healthy, and still have the energy to travel, to pursue things, to show up fully for experiences. Then spending gradually decreases through the mid-70s, not because people are being disciplined, but because their appetite for activity naturally slows. By the time most people are in their early 80s, their biggest expenses are medical, not experiential. Researchers call the early window the go-go years. Then comes the slow-go years. Then the no-go years. The window where your money can actually buy you the life you imagined is shorter than the financial planning industry tends to acknowledge. So here's what a different approach looks like. Instead of withdrawing a flat 4% every year from 65 to 90, you design your spending in a shape that matches real life. You spend at 5.5% to 6% in the go-go years, on the trip to Portugal, on the grandkids, on the experience you've been telling yourself you'll get to eventually. Then you let spending fall naturally to around 3% in the slow-go years, when your needs are simpler and your pace is quieter. The math still works. The portfolio can still hold. But the distribution of when you spend changes completely. This isn't a license to be reckless. It's a recognition that $1 spent at 65, when you can hike, drive, fly, and be fully present for it, is worth more in real human terms than $1 sitting in an account at 82. The purchasing power might be the same on paper. The life value is not. The Regret First framework just asks one question before you make a spending decision. If I don't do this now, will I be able to do it later? For some things, the answer is yes. For others, and you know which ones they are, the answer is probably not. Those are the ones worth prioritizing while the window is still open. Money in retirement is not a number to protect. It's a tool with an expiration date on its usefulness, and the clock on that expiration date isn't your account balance hitting zero. It's your body telling you what it can no longer do. You see, money in retirement isn't a trophy to display. It's meant to be converted into time, into presence, into the things you actually came here to do. So let's bring this back to where we started. The two moves most people make walking into their 60s, getting rid of the stairs, holding tight to the cash, come from a genuine place. They come from wanting to be responsible, wanting to protect what they've built. That instinct isn't wrong. But when protection becomes the only goal, it starts working against you in ways that are hard to see until the damage is already done. What the retirees who are actually living well seem to understand is something simpler than most financial plans give them credit for. They understand that retirement isn't about shrinking your life down to something manageable. It's about redirecting the energy you spent building toward living, toward moving, toward spending intentionally in the years when spending still means something. Geo-arbitrage isn't about abandoning your roots. It's about recognizing that $2,000 a month can mean two completely different lives depending on where you choose to live it. Staying invested isn't about chasing returns. It's about making sure inflation doesn't quietly dismantle the purchasing power you worked 40 years to build. And spending more in your go-go years isn't recklessness. It's an acknowledgement that your capacity to enjoy the money is not going to be the same at 80 as it is at 65. None of this requires a perfect portfolio or a complicated strategy. It requires an honest look at what you actually want the next 20 years to feel like, and then a plan that's built around that answer instead of around fear. Tonight, pull up whatever version of a financial plan you have. Look at it and ask yourself one question. Is this plan designed to help me live well, or is it designed to help me feel safe? Because those two things are not always the same. And for a lot of people in this generation, the plan was built entirely around the second one. If this video gave you a different way to think about any part of that, hit subscribe. We'll keep working through the financial blind spots that matter most for people in their 50s and 60s, the ones the standard advice tends to get wrong. See you in the next one.